all to that.
Lizzie, law enforcement officials have not yet responded to in terms of law enforcement and their response to some of the protests we saw this summer in terms of their stern response to see how they reacted today. It was almost as if they could not believe or would not fathom that these people might actually try to force their way inside the Capitol. And that raises all kinds of questions about privilege and other issues that will be pressed on going forward, Lindsay.
Privilege, and that we have seen time and time again in this country that the rules of engagement are different. Pierre Thomas, thanks so much.
All right, Lindsay, hours after that mob began storming the Capitol, we finally heard from the president in a video message he tweeted to his supporters late this afternoon. We're only going to play a portion of it, though, right now. Let's take a listen.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
Okay, we heard the president right there. That video message was taken down by Facebook. It was flagged by Twitter, also taken down by YouTube. It starts with a lie that the election was stolen from President Trump. We know that's not true. The courts have said that's not true. Joe Biden clearly won this election. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, you know, you and I have both covered President Trump. I covered the campaign. You covered him in the White House and during the campaign. Can you think of a worse day in his presidency, or was today the worst day of his presidency?
I mean, there is some competition for that, Tom, but I think this is the worst day of his presidency. I also think I was standing right here on the day that he had the protesters cleared out of Lafayette Park, and he walked right across here over to St. John's Church and raised that Bible, not reading it, not opening it. So there have been some dark days. Charlottesville. We've had some dark days of the Trump presidency, but this may well be the darkest. To see him effectively encourage that mob to march up Pennsylvania Avenue and to storm the Capitol and then to sit passively while they pushed past Capitol Police and marauded their way through the symbol and the central location of American democracy. That's one of the lowest days, not just of this presidency, but perhaps of any presidency.
You know, John, it was interesting. He spoke about American carnage and how it was going to end during his inauguration, not far from where all of this happened today. He does have a message of law and order. And I was making the point that when you cover the president long enough, things just don't surprise you. But it did surprise me today that he didn't react faster, that people like Kellyanne Conway, Senators Marco Rubio, Governor Chris Christie, all these people, his former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, all these people had to reach out to him, essentially begging him to sort of tell the protesters not only to stop, but to leave Capitol Hill. Do we have any idea what the mindset was, what the calculation was to let his supporters just to run rampant through Capitol Hill?
It's simply a matter of one standard for people who support him and who praise him, and another standard for everyone else. You remember during the civil unrest and the protests surrounding the George Floyd killing earlier of last summer, the president repeated that awful phrase from the civil rights movement: when the looting starts, the shooting starts. You can imagine if these were not Trump supporters who were doing this, who were not pushing past police lines and breaking into the U.S. Capitol, that he would have called, for the military to go in to forcefully clear these people out. And instead, he was looking out and he saw that these were people that were carrying Trump flags. I mean, one thing that struck me watching this stuff unfold today was you did see people carrying American flags, but you saw far more people carrying Trump flags. This was not a protest movement or a political movement. This looked more like a cult of one person. They were there for Trump. They weren't there for even an ideology or for a set of political beliefs. They were there for one person, and that was the insignia they were carrying. Those were the flags they were carrying, and I think he saw that, and his instinct is, if you like him, if you say nice things about him, you know this, he thinks you're all right.
Loyalty above all. John, my final question, what are we going to see happen in 12 days? Will President-elect Joe Biden, will he stand on the same stage as President Trump? Are we going to see a peaceful transfer of power?
we will see a peaceful transfer of power, I firmly believe. But I also believe there is 0% chance that we will see Donald Trump and Joe Biden together on the 20th of January, which is really something, because the transfer of power from an outgoing president to an incoming president is really the crown jewel of American democracy, and we have seen it after every election. We have seen that happen. Now, we have seen a handful of times, and to give you an idea, you have to go back to John Adams leaving the night before Thomas Jefferson was sworn in, or Andrew Johnson, who had been impeached, leaving before Ulysses S. Grant came in. But this is not something that happens. I mean, we have seen for well over a century, we have seen the presidents ingoing and outgoing, no matter how hard fought the campaign was, coming together on the day of the inauguration and being there to take part in this peaceful transfer of power. But there will be a peaceful transfer of power. Joe Biden will be sworn in on January 20th. I just don't believe there's any chance that Donald Trump will be there for it.
Yeah, 14 days from now. Okay, John, we thank you for your reporting. We want to go now to our White House investigative producer, John Santucci, maybe the person who knows President Trump best within the ABC News organization, spent the most time with him, covered his campaign, covered his presidency. John, what did you learn today about our president?
I learned that while most of us were watching television horrified, whether it be in our homes, for the people that do get to go to work, those of you that have actually been in the ABC building today, as those of us working from home, Tom, Donald Trump was doing pretty much the exact same thing. He was vacillating between the Oval Office and the private dining room, which is just off the Oval, watching coverage for a president that, as we've reported, and you know as well as I do, Tom, loves to be on the phone, loves taking phone calls, loves making phone calls. He avoided phone calls for the most part. I mean, Chris Christie said that on our air, but I'm told by multiple sources and allies close to the president, they could not get through to the commander-in-chief today, and their calls were pretty much all going to be identical, Tom, imploring him to get out there, to do something, and to say something. The most interesting thing, though, is that, you know, in the early days of the Trump White House, the place was humming. You couldn't go around a corner without seeing somebody, some aide, some group of people gathering. And not because of the COVID crisis has there been a change of tune, if you will, but it's because most people have just given up. Many staffers are not going to work, especially today. Several people that I know very well openly told me that they were physically not going to go into the building today because they wanted to avoid being near the president, and because they knew that this was potentially going to be a day surrounded by multiple protests and violence, which obviously we've seen play out. But I think, you know, of all the things that I think are the most stunning